Hey everybody, just wanted to recognize that today is the 36th anniversary of Disney's Hollywood Studios. Last year, as you may or may not know, we had an event celebrating that called Stage 89, where we had a large number of the Imagineers who were responsible for creating Disney's Hollywood Studios / Disney-MGM Studios. They came into our studio. We had lots of panels, discussions, fun facts, all that kind of stuff. And that event was for people that paid to attend or that bought the live stream of the event. Now, a year later, we're releasing one of these panels for the first time ever to the public. If you like this, we're going to be having another event coming up soon, as many of you know, for the Celebrating the Life and Legacy of Muppet Vision 3D. It's very popular. We've sold a lot of tickets, and in fact enough that we are moving it to a larger venue. Details emerge soon. We are even considering maybe some budget options for maybe general admission tickets if it's not in your budget. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But that's going to be a gloriousfinale.com. You can find out more information on our website. We are going to culminate that event with a group visit to Muppet Vision 3D on its final day of operation on June 7th. So this event is going to be in June, 3 days, whole weekend. So we're very excited about that, and we really hope you'll join us. And if you can't, we hope you might buy the live stream. Of course, like I said, this is from the live stream last year. We want to give you a taste of it from Stage 89. So please enjoy for the first time this free version of the live stream from last year of one of our panels. Thanks a lot.
First came the Magic Kingdom, then the incredible Epcot Center. Now comes the new Disney-MGM Studios theme park. The Disney-MGM Studios theme park at Walt Disney World in Florida.
Can we go there? I think we're going to go there today, kind of. So, welcome to Stage 89. Appreciate everybody being here. We have an exciting day. I'm not going to waste any time because, of course, we're running behind. But for the next 2 days, we are going to take an incredible journey into the movie theme park that was the Disney-MGM Studios and today Disney's Hollywood Studios as we celebrate 35 years of the park. And we have, I think, the most incredible assemblage of Imagineers that's ever been. I've never seen anyone else do this. There's never been so many Imagineers in person in one place that did one project. This has never happened, maybe beyond the opening day. Bob can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is a pretty special occasion. I don't want to waste any more time, and so if we're ready to go, then I think it's time to bring up Bob Weis and Randy Printz.
Yeah. Good morning. It's great to see you again. I feel like it's day 2. Great to see you again. Randy, it's always great to see you again.
And with you, Bob. Great to be here.
Thanks to Tom and the whole crew. I know how we have a sense of how hard it is to put a TV show together. So, but I think, Tom, the reason, besides all of your hard work and your team's hard work, the reason that this team is all here, this big group of variously expert Imagineers, is because we've always been a team, and we've always supported each other. It was just something, there's something very unique about this project.
And I think virtually all of us think this was the best project team we've ever been on, regardless of the number of experiences, the number of projects we've taken part in.
Yeah, it's just, and you said, Randy, when we were talking this the other day, something important, which was everybody on the team was doing something they hadn't done before.
Absolutely.
Playing a role they hadn't played before.
Yeah, from you to me, we were all trying to learn at the same time as trying to do. And it was an exciting experience.
So we just want to welcome you today and say we're going to give you a real behind-the-scenes kind of look at this project journey. It really is a journey for everybody here. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end, and we hope you enjoy our little trip back memory lane on how this worked.
See if we can go back 39 years and figure out what happened.
Yeah, keep in mind, for us, it's like, for everybody in this room that worked on it, it's like 40 years to us because we started it, more than 4 years before. So that's quite a journey. And many of our team has been involved in the project since we opened. Also, we had a pretty intensive effort beyond that. So we hope you enjoy. We're going to sit down, relax, and talk in even some crazy detail if you want to know. If you want to know some crazy details, and if you have crazy questions, there we are.
When it was just a raw site, back, I think that's right before the press event.
And Randy looks exactly the same.
And so does Bob.
I look like it was 40 years earlier. We had a chance to do some really amazing things, Randy. And a great team, a different kind of team. It was a little project that could. I explained yesterday that it didn't start out big, but it started out fast.
Absolutely. And I think because it was a small project, it built that team spirit. And then as you and the creative force came with better ideas, and Michael and Frank loved them, we all just, oh, gee, we can do that as well. And we did that for about 4 years until it became obvious that we needed to bring some new people on. But that was the key, that the small team that all had a common vision that made this project the best project that it was.
So many of you yesterday talked about you'd like your dream is to be an Imagineer, or your son's dream is to be an Imagineer, or that kind of thing. And we all have an image of Imagineering as this sort of Santa's North Pole factory where that's all beautiful and they bake cookies at 4 o'clock and. But I think Randy and I want to take you back to when this really got put together, which if we were describing a movie, we would say it was the last days of a very dark, dark empire.
Indeed it was. We had come through Epcot and TDL, and Imagineering hadn't been given high marks. We had gone from 2,100 employees to 450 employees. And every Thursday you looked over your shoulder and hoped you didn't get called into your boss's office.
But you saw a lot of people got called out.
Unfortunately, yes, a lot of good people got called out. But all that changed in the fall of 1984 when Michael and Frank came to the company.
And it was palpable. It was just a very fast change. It's hard to emphasize enough to you all how much in Disney, I can't speak for other companies, but how much in Disney the entire world can change in a day, literally in a day. That when we were out on the patio, Randy, and they came in, and none of us knew them. None of us really knew anything about them.
No.
And in an hour on the patio, I'd say we all went from very distressed, upset culture to remembering how exciting it could be to be an Imagineer, and remembering that it's always about possibilities.
And I think they made it clear that they saw Imagineering as almost the creative heart of the company at that point in time.
Yeah,
and
definitely did.
they gave us the confidence that we were going to be okay, we were going to get new projects, and we were going to do great things.
And think of if you've probably seen both of them on camera, or maybe you've seen them in person. Character sketch on Michael, and everybody, by the way, everybody on this team can do his voice. Hello, I'm Michael. Everybody has that. Everybody can do that. But I think when you think of Michael, you think of stream of consciousness. He just was an idea a minute. He just he'd start talking about that, and he'd start talking about that, and he had this rapid fire, and I think that was honed, Randy, from television, because he had been a television executive first. It was a very fast-moving business, as everybody knows. So that was Michael, and so we were all trying to keep up with rapid fire. What about that? What about that? And then Frank was much more. He was the balancing force, right?
He was, but one of the things I enjoyed, you'd get into a meeting and we'd be very intense, and you'd watch them flip their roles from Michael being the creative and Frank being the balance. So suddenly Frank would take over creative with new ideas, and Michael was, I'm not sure we can do that. So the combination of the two was just
That's
right
where the
thing that
balance
we
came
needed.
From. Yeah, it was just where the balance came from. But for any of you that work in organizations, or any of you that someday will run small, medium, any kind of organization, there's nothing better than optimism. There's nothing better than the people at the top sounding optimistic and excited and making you feel like you are strategically important to the company. We always kind of knew that WED, those of us that came to work at WED, were a strategic asset. But if you go through a period where you don't feel that way, it's very distressing because you're very dedicated and you want to do stuff. And so we suddenly had the opportunity to do stuff. We just had to do it fast.
And I'll go back to what you were just saying about the period before, because a company called Disney Development Company had been formed. And they were more commercial residential developers, and they were there to show us how to do it. And it added to the angst, and it made it all the better when we were able to see Michael and Frank and have them spark with how we did things and enjoy the Imagineering environment.
Yeah, and the lucky thing was that they did spend a lot of time at WED, which was still WED at the time, and they wanted to know everything about it. And Frank Wells said many times that he wanted to come over and know everything about the business. So between the two of them, they really learned about the business, and then we had very quickly a lot of creative sessions, brainstorming sessions, where we just, okay, they asked this question, so let's go in a room. And literally, as I said to some of you yesterday, it was a bunch of cards on the wall, index cards, and a few hand-drawn diagrams or that kind of thing. And projects were being launched from that. They really were getting the company going on all cylinders, and we were a part of that.
Absolutely. And one of the other things we should recognize is that in addition to Michael and Frank, some other people came with that new regime.
We're back to the dark days now.
They brought in a couple of people from Marriott, and one was the senior vice president of a new role at Disney, strategic planning. And he was the most...
Hush went over the crowd. Dog woke up.
He had absolutely no imagination, and he believed that everything could be solved on a pocket calculator if you just got the right number of variables. So while Bob was getting the chance to work with Frank and Michael a lot, I got to spend time with him, and Bruce Lavelle and I got to try and invest him in what it was, what all the numbers meant, what is THRC, et cetera. So there was a learning process throughout the corporate management, and it gave us an opportunity to try and influence them at the same time as they influenced us.
And he had a charter. We have to say everybody has a job, right? Everybody has a charter. But his charter was to keep the company out of trouble. So and to keep the company from building things that would dilute the value of the company. And at that time, hard to believe since what's been built since, but at that time there was a very real sense that the theme park business had capped, and there was nowhere else for it to go. So here we were, Michael and Frank saying, go, get this thing together again. We're going to go build it tomorrow. And their other side saying, well, we want to study this because we don't even think we should be in the theme park business anymore. So hard to believe, but that is the struggle from which Disney-MGM and the other things that came out of that era came from.
And I think we can also go back to Michael and Frank coming down here to Epcot and saying, gee, where's our business? Why isn't the entertainment business represented with telecommunications and land and energy and all the others? And then that sparked Bob.
And that was the first question, and that was their first question. And I think it doesn't sound like a crazy question now, but it did at the time, because Epcot, we thought of, I think, Fortune 500 as, Exxon and General Motors, and we didn't think like an entertainment company. But if you compare the Disney at the time to what Disney is today, and all of the breadth of ESPN and so many things, it did make a lot of sense. And so you sort of think back about, I sometimes think back about Michael Eisner and think, his mind was always focused on the future.
Absolutely.
But it did start out as an entertainment pavilion at Epcot, and I'd say we had a few weeks at the most to explore that idea. We came up with the idea of some kind of ride about movies, something about television, something about radio or music, in a pavilion type. We're trying to sort of say, well, how big is an Epcot pavilion usually? And we came up with some ideas that took off pretty quick until I think it came up that at the same time they were asking WDI to wildly expand the park business, they were asking Jeffrey Katzenberger, who had come in from Paramount for the studio, asking him to expand the film business. And so it came up that Michael thought we should build sound stages, and we should do production there, and we should build animation there. So all of a sudden, we're looking at a site plan of Epcot, this thing that looks bigger than Epcot.
And, originally it started out with the sound stages across the service road.
Right.
But I think very quickly they realized that this had enough specific gravity that it could be a park of its own.
And that's when we're carrying this struggle along with us. We got us trying to do this with direction from different sides. But the way to think about this is you've got the chairman and the president saying, okay, now show me it as a park. And then you've got strategic advisors saying the park business is dead. And so a great idea was come up with that some people thought it was a great idea, that people arrive to Disney World in the afternoon often before they can check into their rooms, or they check out of their rooms and they're there for most of the day before they go to the airport. So there was this gap of about a half day. And they said, maybe we can go after that half day. And so the original idea was that this studio park on its own site would always be in this half-day moment. There's a big thing, Randy, I think, at that time, and less so now, but cannibalism, which wasn't eating each other, although we thought about it. It was cannibalization, meaning if you build this thing too big, is it just going to take away from Epcot, or is it going to take away from Magic Kingdom? But if you got it the right size, you could probably do it.
But the flip side of cannibalization was we recognized that we were only getting, 2.5 days out of 3 days of people. And they were going to, whether it's the Kennedy Space Center, SeaWorld, or going to the attractions on iDrive or 192, and there was an opportunity there to bring those guests back and uncannibalize ourselves
right, and have more.
And get more out of them and get them a full 3-day experience.
Well, and also realize that as we were playing around with where we might put this, and you saw us out on the site, playing around with where we might put this small half-day park, the Disney Development Company was looking at expansion of hotels. We were looking at expansion of nighttime activity for what used to be a very little Disney Village. So there was this, okay, we're going to do more on Walt Disney World property, and this is one of those. This is when Typhoon Lagoon was conceptualized. All those things were kind of happening at the same time.
Including one that we got involved in, ancillary. I remember Disney Mountain. Chris Carradine.
Disney Mountain, there was a thing called Disney Mountain, which was between Epcot and us, between Epcot and the studio. There was the possibility of doing some kind of Disney Mountain project in Burbank. We were, trust us, we were like firehouse dogs that just, the bell went off and go look at that. It was a wild time.
It was. But there were forces coming at us that said, okay, we want you to think about doing things in a very different way. One of those was something called design build. WDI would be doing the creative and the show ride, and then we'd go get a mega corporation that did architecture, engineering, and construction, and they would do all of the architecture, engineering, and most importantly, manage budget and schedule. And that was a new dynamic for us, and one that we had to work through at the same time as we were trying to design and build this project.
Yeah, it was sort of like everything's moving, but you're trying to figure out what it is that you're doing at the same time. But we did pretty quickly embark, and I talked yesterday about the great movie ride and Frank Armitage's incredible painting that he did, that in many ways launched the whole project of the gangster scene with the cast member kind of losing his job and the gangster takes over. So the pressure to move forward was really strong, and so thankfully, Randy, you came on. Bruce Laval, who's an incredible operations legend, for those of you that know Bruce Laval, just somebody who's figured out, I think I learned everything I learned about theme parks, I learned from Bruce. Everything I've learned about building them, I learned from Randy. But again, we were all kind of in this new role. But we were very quickly out in the dirt looking for sites.
Because in part, Michael and Frank knew that Universal was going to build something here in Orlando, and it was very clear in their minds that whoever was the first organization to get open had a strategic advantage. And so there was tremendous schedule pressure on us to try and get this project done as quickly as we could.
And I think there was, I think we all loved what we were doing, and we didn't necessarily like feeling like we were in a head-to-head competition with Universal. We're all talented people, and we're all trying to do great stuff. But it was that, there was, and I think that I would speculate that in Michael's mind, maybe he hoped that if we announced we were going to do this project so radically, they might not do it. But I don't think any of us thought that. And it was all our friends working on both projects, and it went the other way. They accelerated theirs.
Catch up with us.
So here we were in this war of studio tours.
And another piece of that dynamic was Michael and Frank thought that the studio portion needed to be open long enough in advance to have actual product that we could show that had been done in those studios. So that was going to open a year in advance of the theme park. So we had schedule pressure on two perspectives: get the studio open and then get the theme park open. And that was a unique challenge for all of us.
And we actually, wholeheartedly agreed that it would be nice if the sound stages or backlot areas, those kind of things, were seen already, were known as having production. Again, this is back when both Disney and Universal, I think, believed that real production was an important part of a studio tour. That has all evolved, as we know, into a different thing in our future. But at that time, it was really important to have a legitimate studio and have something that could really work and could be open early. And so we reached out we were not studio builders.
Absolutely.
So we reached out to some very specialized people to help us.
Milt Foreman was the key guy from the studio operations, studio requirements perspective.
And he was a Academy Award winning technology person in the film business, and he was probably 70 when he
Probably
worked on the project, but he came in and he just knew how to build sound stages, how big they should be, to how many pencils should be in the drawer of each production office. I mean, he knew the whole gambit. He was an incredible advisor.
And the studio had assigned Marty Katz to us to be their liaison, and so at the same time, Marty was trying to figure out with Bob Allen Jr. down here what was going to be produced at the studio, what kind of facilities did they need. And all of that was happening at the same time we were trying to put pencil to paper and get into the dirt because we had to get open.
And Marty, it's fun, the personalities sometimes. Marty was filmmaker for the United States Army in Vietnam. And he filmed action and battles and things as recorded for the Army. And then he had worked for Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner. And so when Marty they were launching like 25 television shows that he was responsible for, and wherever he went, he had to get everything done fast because he had to go back and produce another show. So he would just blow into our offices and he'd say, call Mill Foreman, do that, da, da. And he had someone with him with a pad writing everything down. You got all that? And he was gone. They were like 15-minute meetings with Marty. It was incredible.
And then we had John Richards from the animation side.
Yeah. And we had a very disagreeable relationship with Disney Animation. Again, everybody we were working with had already been given orders to do something different. Like, you need to have 15 animated movies done in the next 10 years. So they're trying to do that with Roy Disney and Peter Schneider. And then we sort of crawl over and say, oh, by the way, did they tell you you're going to have an animation studio in Florida? Who said that? We don't need an animation studio in Florida. But slowly, I would say the project's moving fast, but slowly the entities kind of got on board and realized this was really going to happen.
I think as a company, as a corporation, everybody bought in very quickly, and Studio Tour became a focus for all of our energies.
All of our energies, and certainly having, probably Michael's staff meeting, Michael and Frank's staff meeting that was coming up. Certainly seeing that he was, making this happen was huge, and as quickly as we could, we pulled together a program. We're trying to do estimates. We're trying to do scopes of work all at the same time, and we did get to the point where we were kind of like, we almost know what we're going to do, or at least at the beginning stages. And what I remember, Randy, is it would have been nice to have just like, okay, well, you guys all go away now, and we'll just like spend some time designing this thing, and the next thing we find out is, no, you don't have the time to do that because you got to do a groundbreaking.
Yeah.
Because we got to do something big in public.
Absolutely, and and at that point in time, I think it was Bob Hope that came down for that.
Yep.
Because we were going to have his memorabilia. As part of the project.
So Bob Hope came in. We cleared a little space on the
North-South Road,
World Drive, and brought the press in, and very, very fast paintings. This is back in the old days when you painted stuff and then blew it up on giant billboards on the side of the road. It was the point at which you knew, once you have a groundbreaking at Disney, you announce an opening date. That's it.
You're set.
You don't know if you can make it, but you're gonna make it.
You don't have an alternative. You're going to be open that day regardless.
Right. So then we start designing.
And we started.
And we start this experiment with design build.
Right. I explained why we were going design build earlier, but for Studio Tour, as I was going through the memorabilia out in the museum, I noticed a package from Fluor dated, I think, August of 1985, which is when we were selecting our design builder. Fluor was one, Bechtel, Stone & Webster, AECOM were the others. And
they're huge international companies.
All of them. And we had asked them to, we wanted to go to their offices. We wanted to see the team that would be working. We also wanted them to show us a project that they thought was representative of their abilities to execute for us. So for AECOM, they took us to a Saturn automobile assembly plant that they were just putting together in Tennessee. For Fluor Daniels, they took us to a petrochemical plant in Louisiana.
Feels like Studio Tour, right?
Stone & Webster took us to an office building in downtown Boston. And then we went to San Francisco to see Bechtel, and they were going to show us an office building, but along the way, they took us to their office, and we saw some creative work they had done for projects in Saudi Arabia. And it was the closest thing that we had seen in any of our visits to themed architecture. And that led to us choosing Bechtel and then being told, all right, let's try it out for 90 days. And during that time, as Bob was saying, we were doing scopes, we were doing estimates, we were doing schedules, we were doing everything we could to try and prove that the project was viable at the same time as trying to pioneer a whole new way of Disney building a project with another outside entity.
And we did find another entity through Milt Forman, and as we were thinking about how to bring the credibility to the studio, we brought in a company, a small architectural company, where there was a partner named Richard Graham, and Richard had designed buildings for up on the George Lucas's ranch. He had done the technical building there. He had done work on the main house, and he had also done quite a bit of work designing post-production facilities and soundstage facilities. So Richard joined our team. He actually he's probably one of the most prolific architects in Disney history that you've never heard of, because he was never a Disney employee. He was a consultant the whole time. He worked on many projects with us. But luckily, I think, Randy, we had Milt, we had Richard. They were really going for helping us go for quality, for sustainability of the studio, really trying to do what we were trying to do. At the same time, we had Bechtel saying that we've got to make it more efficient. So it was positive, but it was a struggle.
It was positive, it was a struggle, and I think, like any project, there are some things you do right and some things you do wrong. And several of us on the team will remember the night that we shot the Carol Burnett special for the studio tour. It was the premiere, or the initial show to be produced on site, and during rehearsals they noticed that it was a little bit hot. And so got a little worse as they continued, and then I think between Craig Russell and a bunch of us, we went out and got every portable air conditioning system that existed in the state of Florida. And many of us spent the night of the special running air conditioning hoses around the studio facility so that the audience and cast and crew were comfortable. So there were some learning pains along the way as well.
Growing pains, definitely. But it was a big moment. It was a big moment to have the studio open and have production coming in and people coming in looking at how it worked and how they were laid out. And there's Justin Bieber, Christina Aguilera. There's a lot of kids who came into the Mickey Mouse Club show who made their careers there. So there was a lot that Tom Hanks shot From the Earth to the Moon. In those early stages, we were quite optimistic that Florida production would be a viable.
Yeah, we
thing.
were very optimistic.
Yeah.
We built the whole studio on that premise.
So I'm back to the dark side again. So if you could imagine that all of these projects, not just us, but every one of these projects that was racing out wherever in the Disney system it was, quite a few of them in Florida, some of them started to get what management considered to be out of control. So, and it's exactly the kind of thing that you would expect to happen when you've got new people, you've got new ideas, and you're trying to do them really fast. And
with a new system.
And with a new system and a new management that doesn't really necessarily understand how this whole thing works. And yet, there's one quality of Imagineers that's pretty much always there, I think, which is optimism. And I think some of what we found out during that period is optimism is great, but too much optimism is not great. You have to be realistic. And teams, I would say, never want to say that they can't make it. You just don't want to say it. We're going to find a route out, right? But there was a period here where there were several projects that had been overly optimistic, and there was a process that we went through. I'll let Randy describe it because it was so much fun, of basically kind of being audited by our own company of where we were.
But I'm going to go back a little bit before that, because yes, indeed, we'll talk about Jeff and his our presentations to him and stuff. But along the way, I think one of the things that differentiated our project from others was that we were small, and everybody bought into the overall vision of what Studio Tour was supposed to be. On other projects, you had a ride guy who was worried about the ride, and it had to be the best, or the show, et cetera. And they might bicker and fight, and as a result, cost and schedule got impacted. You know, we were lucky enough to be co-located down in a far corner of the studio of the WDI parking lot, and we'd get together regularly, and we'd have whiteboard sessions, and Dick Riggert and I would figure out how much we were over on various things, and it was not pleasant, but we would all sit there, and we would all figure out, okay, if I give this and you gave that, we would get to the end that we needed to. And in that process, the team coalesced again and moved forward very, very well.
And we included everybody in that process. So
Yes.
It was, we called them, I called them horse trading sessions, but everybody was a part of it. So it wasn't like two people went in the back room and figured out what we're going to do. It was like bring the whole team in. Together.
Absolutely not. That way, everybody was bought into whatever the decision was. Everybody knew what it was and bought into that decision. And we never had any recriminations, backbiting, any thoughts different than, okay, that's what we're going to do now. I think the other advantage we had was that Bob and the creative team were constantly coming up with new ideas, and the park was beginning to grow. The Backlot Tour was growing. Cat Canyon was coming on. Star Tours was coming on. And each time we did that, we would go back to Michael and Frank and ask for a little more money. And Dick Riggert and I would figure out, well, if we put in just a little bit to take care of what we needed already, and that gave us the opportunity, at least cost-wise, to stay together. But
that's interesting.
I'm going to go back to Bob's dark days again.
Before you go to the dark days, I got one more thing to add to what you just said, because the dark days are fun. Hold on. It's another advantage I think we had, which is we were launching Disneyland Paris, and much of Imagineering's focus went to Disneyland Paris, and it is so valuable to be the second project. Because if you're in the first project, you got a microscope on you all the time. To be the second project, you can kind of just go about your business. And once in a while, you get checked in, but it wasn't nearly as much of a whole bunch of people, scrutinizing everything. We had to manage ourselves, but we didn't get help from, we couldn't get help from a lot of departments. So in fact, almost everybody in this room that worked on the project, who you'll hear from, were almost like one-person departments with an outside support vendor. So, because everybody was on Paris, so it was, I think, part of what made us a small enclave.
Absolutely, and Paris was the big important project. So it was where a lot of Imagineers wanted to be, and they would turn and look at us. And at some point, they decided that we were the Waltons, if you'll remember that 1970s television show. We were this small family-oriented group that, everybody could kick to the curb, but we succeeded. But maybe we should go to the dark days.
Well, I think that was the Waltons actually came out of the dark days because in order to find out if the WDI system was working or not, they had to do some pretty tough audits on projects, and there was a group that did that, and they I think tended to want to get teams, and it's sort of like what you do in a criminal interrogation. You put people in different rooms and see if they'll think on each other, or if one person has a slightly different story than the other, and then you could say, see, it's going to be over budget. He said it. He said it a different way. So they put us all in separate interrogation rooms, and the great thing was they came back. That's when they came back and said, "Those guys are like the Waltons. They won't say anything bad, and they're all working together." And it was like, yeah, isn't that what's supposed to happen? We're not supposed to live in the same house, but we are supposed to like each other and work together.
And put a little context on this. I vividly remember, this is December of 1988. We'd gotten the studio open, and several of these other projects were suddenly appearing to be going over budget and off schedule. And the guy who was running Imagineering at the time came down to Orlando and called us all into the Lake Buena Vista Club and gave what I fondly recall as the liars, cheats, and thieves speech, basically saying he'd been lied to, cheated, and on all these other projects, and was sure that it was going on down here on the projects in Florida. And he'd be in his suite in the Polynesian Hotel, and if anyone knew anything, they were to come and tell him so that he could make sure things got right. As Bob said, some of us got called to confession, in my mind, individually to be interrogated.
That's right. It was an interrogation.
About
an
what?
inquisition.
Yes. And we always, all the people on Studio Tour said everything was fine. And I remember the tag to this story is I was going to fly home for one day for Christmas. I was going to fly home Christmas Eve, and I was going to fly back the day after Christmas. But I got a call that I had to be on the phone at a specific time to talk to WDI management to get the download of what went on. So I had to change my travel plans. I was trying to travel with my family, so I had to move all of that around. And got the phone call, and this leader of WDI was, I know something is wrong, but you know what? Nobody says it. Everybody says everything's fine with your project, but when it goes wrong, I'm going to come get you. And that was the kind of environment that we were working in at that point in time.
So I said we were going to say how fun it is to be an Imagineer here. But the fun part of this story is the person that Randy is referring to was gone before we finished the project. So we got some overall trust, and it's a credit to you, Randy. It really is a credit to you that the learning is it's always transparent. Everything has to be transparent to everyone.
Yes.
And this is even if you're a Pixar fan, it's in Ed Capnell's book. Just transparency to the entire team, to everything, and hiding something, or even hiding something with a good intention because you think it's going to get worked out later or something like that. There's no point. You just report everything very transparently.
Absolutely. And I think we got positive reinforcement very quickly in that right after Christmas, Michael, Frank, and Jeffrey started to come down every month because we were in the last 5 months until opening, and they wanted to see the project. And they were very positive, but they also were ready with a whole list of things that we could do to improve the project. So all of a sudden, while we were still trying to get the base project done, we had a number of special projects that had to get added to improve the quality of the product.
So if you go back to that half-day thesis, pretty much halfway through the project, that was thrown out. It's like, it's not going to be a half-day thing. It's going to be a full-day park. And it was thrown out because we did a series of focus groups and went around to folks like you and sat and had them critique the project, and you sit behind a glass and you listen. And the overwhelming response was, this is not going to be a half-day park. And in fact, when people heard a number for the ticket price and that it was going to be a half-day park, it completely colored their perception of what it was going to be. They said, well, it's not going to be any good then. Why would we go? Right. And then they would say, most of them would say, you're actually not going to do that. They would tell us, we know you're not going to do that. You're going to build a whole park because you know that you need another park. If you can imagine when Bruce Laval and all of us, but Val being the lead operator, suddenly finds out that he's probably got 200% of the capacity coming than we were planning on building. So all of a sudden, we're almost in crisis mode to do things, and that's where these late ads, like Star Tours was a very late ad. It had been a hit in California. They said, well, let's do it at the studio, and let's start it now, even before the first phase is finished. And with that then comes, if you're going to add more attraction capacity, you're going to have to add more dining capacity and more retail capacity and more cast support facilities. So you're kind of trying to build this little thing that you had at the same time as it's moving that way, you're adding stuff to it.
And another dimension of that was when they came down, one of the first things they talked about was, where are the stars? And Jeffrey Katzenberg got tasked to go find stars to do little bits that we could put in queue lines and waiting areas. But when we did that and we played the sound, everybody, oh my goodness. One of our criteria had been, don't do expensive audio, acoustics in some of those pre-show areas. And suddenly we were going in and putting battens and baffling and everything we could to, so that we were also going back and having to fix some of the direction we had been given about being inexpensive and a little lower than Disney standard when we started the project.
Yeah, it was, and the nice thing is you got enthusiasm behind you. It's always great to have enthusiasm behind you. We would go out to the site, and Michael Eisner was in town, and he'd say, hey, he's going to meet the site, so you get a hard hat and a vest for him to go out and some boots to go out on the site, and he never showed up. Where's Michael? We're ready for him. We're ready for the tour. And you look out over the horizon, and there's this big, tall guy walking out there in a suit. He just took off and started walking around.
Absolutely.
Enthusiasm's a great thing, and it can help you do the impossible. I always like to use the Indiana Jones stunt spectacular as an example. We were building that theater, and we didn't really know what the show was because we just hadn't gotten to something that worked. And when we finally hit on Indiana Jones, because it was something that the company had just acquired the park rights for, there was no question that everybody looked at the team, and some of them are here, you should talk to them, and said, it's impossible. You first of all, you don't have the money. Second of all, you don't have the time and all of that. And to see that 35 years later, still operating, I just saw the show, it's still operating so well with a full audience. But that was serendipitous. It was just like the right property came in, and we had to get well on that with some more money, but it was the team that pulled it off, that made something that is truly the impossible made possible.
The schedule on that was horrendous, and the technology was one of a kind for that era, and trying to do all of that, and in the midst of it, having the primary vendor go bankrupt, and us having to figure out how to resurrect that. The team on that project did Herculean work and delivered an extraordinary experience.
And I know Craig Wilson is here. You should talk to Craig Wilson while you're here too. And we had just started to see how street theater was working incredibly well at Epcot in World Showcase. And so Craig came in with a group of colleagues and came up with this idea of Streetmosphere, to have characters that really sort of lived in the environment of the studio or in Hollywood Boulevard. And that was another thing that created things for people to do. So, things that you could put out there. Obviously, we have Disney characters too, but to have characters out there to interact with you, and actually that was one of the things people noticed a lot. And I think that really made the studio, that including putting the cast members in the Great Movie Ride, having cast members participating in the Superstar Television. The park had a different feel than the other parks, had a more live feel.
Very different.
So would you like us to open up for questions for a few minutes? Are we able to do that, Tom, before we wrap? We got one more thing we want to talk about.
I have to get in the room.
Huh? He's not. He's not.
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Well, let's do.
I'm here. We can.
We've talked a lot. How about if we give you guys a test or something?
So questions.
Yeah. So we'd love to hear some questions, or we'll ask some.
Thank you for getting the ball rolling. It's very hard to be the first person to raise your hand.
I'm going to start by asking maybe quite an unrelated question, but what was that about the Disney Mountain between Epcot and Hollywood and MGM? You mentioned that, and
I'm going to jump in here. We actually have the documents for that, And during lunch, we're going to play that for everybody.
Wow.
So I don't know how much
Wow.
Bob wants to say, but
Right.
during lunch, we have a video with all those blueprints and everything for all of you. So
I'll just
worry.
I'll just say that the most dramatic thing that happened on property, I think in 20 years, was happening at the same time we were building, which was they decided to open up World Showcase and have that lagoon that now comes all the way around where the Yacht and Beach Club and all the way down to the Swan, and you can take a boat from inside Epcot all the way to the entrance to the studio tour. That was one of the biggest moves on the property. And the part that goes from Epcot, that connects the lake from Epcot to almost to the studio tour, there's a long site there which has a lake right now, and it has the dolphin and the swan. WDI mounted a huge effort to make that something different, and that was what Disney Mountain was. It was going to be a much more creative, kind of village-type experience as opposed to the two big hotels there, because WDI didn't particularly like the scale of the hotels or the hotels themselves that much. So there was a holy war that went on for a little while, and we lost, put it that way.
And we got drug into it by default. Bechtel got tasked to do structural engineering analysis and things like that, and cost and schedule. So they were doing that at the same time we were trying to prove that Studio Tour was a viable project in that 90-day program.
You say you have a, I say you have a war, trying to be funny a little bit, but the truth is, you have people on all sides of these things who truly believe in what should be done. And often you have two different opinions or three different opinions. And Michael and Frank had to be the arbiter of those arguments. And I think they benefited from seeing a range of possibilities, even if you didn't get what you wanted.
But if you want to learn more, it's playing at lunch, and also it's
great.
on our YouTube channel. Just search Disney Mountain. There's a whole 2-hour deep dive on that.
Yeah. If you can't sleep one night.
Multiple people here have told me they put their babies in front of our shows and we put them to sleep. It is a thing, believe it or not.
Other questions?
Yeah, gentlemen, this is on. Can you hear me? Thanks for being here. This is awesome. Love hearing all these stories. So this is kind of a personal question. You look back now for you guys 40 years later, and you see a lot of these original creations gone. What does that feel like to you guys? Is that like, a loved one is moved out or something? I mean, you guys have put so much. You talked about the passion and the teamwork and all that you put in. You look back, and now a lot of those original attractions are gone. How does that feel?
I never felt that the studio tours vibe was like Disneyland, meaning sort of everything being classic and staying for, the aesthetic we went after with the studio was behind the scenes, changeable. Like if you'd have asked Randy or I how long the Indiana Jones show would be there, we would have said about 10 years, something like that. The things were supposed to change very often. The Great Movie Ride, we were supposed to be able to have a scene that could change. So I think most of us, and you can ask others in the room, I think when we saw something go down, we knew it was being replaced by, Star Wars or by something else. So it's always gone. It's always been a very dynamic thing, and there's lots of fans of the Great Movie Ride, and we thought the Great Movie Ride was a great inventive ride when it was built. But we thought having the first ride ever that featured, the classic Mickey and Minnie characters was a great idea too. So, as Walt said, I'm sorry, Randy, I'll give it to you. As Walt said, we keep moving forward. Walt said the parks are never be finished, and I think that our attitude about the studio was that it was less precious in many ways, especially backstage, than maybe it would have been had it been more of a, you're not going to build half of Disneyland Paris the way they built it and then tear it down and replace it with stuff. It's a different kind of park, and we thought this was a sort of more rough and ready park.
I'll give a little counterpoint to that. I think for a lot of us, this is still Disney-MGM Studios. Regardless of the name changing, there are obvious, very rational reasons why we changed. But when you put as much blood, sweat, and tears as the team did into this, there's always a little bit of angst, a little bit of, gee, isn't that a little sad? But as Bob just said, when you're doing it and replacing it with something better, it's the right thing for the project.
Except for Doug Live, right? Except for Doug Live. No. Won't talk about that one. Do you have more questions?
Except for the hat, the giant hat.
The hat? Oh, he said it. He said the thing. He said.
I worked very hard to get rid of that hat. We finally did. We got rid of it.
So this is sort of related to that question. I think the biggest change to the park now is the sound stages aren't sound stages anymore. The production side of the park is really gone. Wow, how do you think that happened?
Well, it happened because the amount of production that made sense just didn't pan out it didn't pan out for either Universal or Disney, I think. And so I think we ended up spending more effort trying to create production than use it. And if you really look at the film business, people go wherever they need to go. All the Marvel movies are filmed in Atlanta for one reason or another because of taxes and facilities and things like that. Or people go to Canada or they go outside the zone in Los Angeles. It became very cumbersome. And I think we always knew it would be cumbersome to mandate production. Where it did work for a while is, for instance, when we redid Let's Make a Deal for network television, and so you had that nice big stage filled all the time with production every day. But over time, the evolution of the studio has really been toward experiencing the movies, putting guests into more experiences in stories, and so it was felt that those stages were better utilized for, Toy Story game, for other things that we could use them to expand the guest offerings at the studio. Studio attendance we've always been chasing attendance, meaning we always were smaller than the size of the smaller capacity than the amount of audience. We maybe caught up by the time we did Sunset Boulevard and Tower of Terror and Rock and Roller Coaster, but it's always been chasing to try to, because everybody goes to Magic Kingdom, everybody goes to Epcot, everybody goes to the studio in Animal Kingdom, but the studio always had the smallest amount of real estate and program, so it just made sense to go in that direction for this modern audience too, I think.
Other questions? I'm gonna squeeze through here.
So also related to the hat comment, can you talk more about the decision? Can you talk more about the decision to do the large hidden Mickey in the hub of the park? How that decision came about?
Not as well as it could have.
It's a hidden Mickey, and it was kind of a goofy thing, and Chris Carradine and Tim Kirk and I were working on the site plan. It's literally this goofy. We were working on the site plan, and we kind of turned it, and I said, it kind of looks like Mickey. Kind of looks like Mickey in the hub, and Tim Kirk who draws characters really well, put a piece of tracing paper over, and he drew Mickey on top of the thing, and we said, well, let's do it. Let's we'll do it with planters, and we'll do it with, we had a curved wall that made up part of the face, and the nose was a planter and things like that. It was never intended to be a driver of the plan. It wasn't like, you can't put anything on the Mickey face. We compromised it in many ways, and we have buildings sitting on top of the ears and things. But we thought it was it was kind of at the beginning of the hidden Mickey craze, and we said, well, we got an opportunity to build the biggest Mickey ever, and so it's still visible. If you go to Google Earth, you can still see it, but it's subtle, but you can still see it.
I just remember a number of us, we were flying back and forth between California and Florida. You'd get on that Delta flight, and they'd start to bank out, and we'd all be craning our heads out the windows. Could we really see, as the project developed, could we see Mickey coming to life?
Yeah. So it was just kind of a fun insider thing. People are surprised when they see it, even today, that it really is there. Anything else? Sounds like that's it.
No, any other questions?
Oh, one over here.
Back to the other side. Watch out. It's a big studio. We could fit a third track for Toy Story.
Yeah.
Maybe a last fun question. We've heard Bob's Michael Eisner. Randy, can we hear your Michael Eisner?
No, I'll defer that to Bob. He's the best.
You know, one time, Tom Fitzgerald, the amazing writer, producer, creative person, he did the best Michael. And one time we were in 2 vans in Seville, Spain, and we had this wonderful host that we were going to the World's Fair, and the hosts were with us, and I think I was in one vehicle, and Tom was in another vehicle, and the host was with us. She was really just on top of everything, really fast moving and everything, and so Tom called her cell phone, said, "Hello, I'm Michael Eisner. I need to speak to Bob Weis right away," and we look forward, and the car like veers 3 lanes over the. We pull off the highway. We almost killed all of us. And then Tom had to explain, "Hello, he was the voice." So you got to be careful. Okay, if we've kind of flattened out the questions, what we'd love to do is go to a team picture we have here that Randy found, and we just keep.
No.
That's the one that has more people on it.
In front of Grauman's.
In front of Grauman's, but I think Randy and I just cannot ever say enough about this team and this group of people who cut their teeth on this project. A lot of them are here, not all, but we'd like to ask our team members in the room, and you'll get more time with them later, but we'd like to ask you all to come up, and we'll take another shot. And we'll announce you as you come up. Cindy Cody, basically the spiritual leader of the whole project. Richard Vaughn, all of the backlot tour, inventor of Catastrophe Canyon.
Chris Brown, mechanical engineer extraordinaire, all the ride systems, special effects.
Single-handedly, all the effects you see, the ride systems you see. Behind the scenes, subtle Eric Robeson, but worked a whole lot on expansion. Kathy Rogers.
Coordinator extraordinaire.
Great movie ride.
Craig Russell, who earned the moniker Human Xerox Machine for his efforts at Project Notes. Paul Osterhout.
Superstar Television, Star Tours, Ewok Village. Come on, Sandy.
Sandy Russell, coordinator extraordinaire as well.
Extraordinaire. Eric Jacobson, and creator of the Great Movie Ride. Valerie Johnson, media all across the park. Anytime you saw media, it was Valerie's role.
Brad Borgman, another one of the wonderful mechanical engineers who did all the ride systems, as well as Frank Wygand.
Wygand Ride Systems. The youngest Imagineer, if you haven't heard that before, that's still probably the youngest, I assume. Ryan Harmon, who's also put so much of our event together today. Thank you, Ryan. Lane, I've got to read your last name now. You read it. Lane Dunham White, who worked throughout the backstage tour and one of the co-creators of Tower of Terror. Remember I mentioned that we decided to do Indiana Jones at the last minute and no time and no money? This is the guy who made it happen, Philip Vaughn.
Brock Thoman, who single-handedly brought Grauman's Chinese to Central Florida. And Phil Bloom, our show set designer extraordinaire.
All right, I think we're going to have to move in. We'll probably have to double layer. We'll get a.
Or like do 2 layers or. Get your cameras ready, folks. How about a round of applause?
Thank you all. Even the dog stood up. All right. Thank you all, and thanks for bringing us all together. We came back together for all of you, so thank you.